Star Trek Beyond is the best of the pre-boot Star Trek movies. The characters aren't making idiotic decisions so the plot can happen. Kirk insulted your mom? Better maroon him on a planet where he'll likely die. Don't put him in the brig, which you normally do with ornery people on your ship. Scotty's protesting bringing strange missiles on your ship? Force him to resign, then don't use the missiles. This movie doesn't do that. The plot feels natural and the characters' actions feel organic. I already did videos on the other pre-boot movies, and I needed to close it all up with my take on this trilogy. Things I liked but will not use. Kirk wanting to be a vice admiral, then reconsidering. This feels genuine to the character in the previous timeline. Kirk was promoted to admiral before Star Trek the Motion Picture, and he horned in on Captain Decker's action first chance he got because he missed it. In the afterlife, Kirk told Picard never to let them promote him out of the captain's chair. Oh. Kirk on the fence and deciding to stay feels honest to who he is, no matter what timeline it is. Since he hasn't become captain in my videos, I won't do that. We'll have number 1, the character from The Cage, promoted to admiral after Into Darkness, with Spock as captain of the Enterprise and Kirk as his first officer. I like Spock's character arc as well. Admiral Spock from the future died shortly before the events of this movie, and with the limited number of Vulcans since the destruction of their planet, Spock considers leaving Starfleet to, as Bones puts it, make little Vulcans. His arc dovetailing with Kirk's is nice, but it gets a little heavy-handed with every time Kirk or Bones tells Spock how much Kirk depends on him. While I love how they worked in Leonard Nimoy's death into the narrative in a pretty tasteful way, it is weird Spock would choose now to go back to his people. There's just as many Vulcans as there was at the end of the 2009 film when Ambassador Spock convinced him to stay in Starfleet. Since I didn't use Ambassador Spock in my version of the 2009 movie, nor did I have the time-traveling Romulans destroy Vulcan, I won't do any of this. The only thing I wasn't crazy about were the bad guys. Some of the first Starfleet officers somehow got stuck at the edge of space and turned into space vampires. They're mad Starfleet forgot about them, so they want to blow stuff up. This isn't great. I commend them for not poorly remaking a known character or plot point from Trek lore, but even though this character isn't Gary Seven or Governor Kodos, it's still a bad guy who wants revenge against the Federation. 5 out of the 13 movies feature villains out for revenge. That might not seem like a lot, but it gets repetitive, especially when you have 4 in a row. We can do better. Since my previous videos involved a Romulan war, we'll pick up that plot thread. The Romulans have intel from the future that gives them an edge against their enemies. The Klingons and the Federation join forces with each other. We'll pick up a year or 2 after Into Darkness. Things are still a little bumpy. No, not their foreheads. Those are as smooth as an android's bottom thanks to the augment virus. The Klingons and the Federation were hostile with each other for years, so even though they share a common enemy, things are tense. We have a Klingon serving on the Enterprise and on other Federation ships. Anytime there's an important staff meeting like what we had in Into Darkness, high-ranking Klingons will be there like Gorkon. Like the TNG episode A Matter of Honor where Riker was on a Klingon ship, this is a way to build trust. The Klingons learn from the Federation and vice versa. This will be one of Kirk's adversaries from the original series, Kang, Kor, or Koloth. This provides good drama in already tense situations, as Spock will call shots that make the most sense for the good of the ship, retreat and make a more calculated assault later. But the Klingons are all about honor and going out in a blaze of glory, so Spock making decisions based on logic grinds his gears. If you want fisticuffs on the bridge like these movies wanted, this is where you get that. Our plot involves Arnold Darvin, who showed up once in the original series and later in Deep Space Nine, the Tribbles episodes if you're interested. You might be surprised I'm bringing in an old villain, but I never had a problem with Into Darkness doing that. I just didn't like them remaking Wrath of Khan, but worse. If you're gonna bring back pieces of old lore, do something interesting. Arnold Darvin is a Klingon operative who was surgically redesigned to appear human, and he is furious the Klingons have allied with the humans after he spent most of his career fighting the Federation. He believes the Empire's alliance with the Federation has made them weak, and he will do whatever it takes to strengthen the Empire and tear apart the Federation. Failing that, he wants to tear down the Empire for betraying the cause he was once so dedicated to. It's not revenge against the Federation per se, so it's okay. Arnold Darvin brings the augment virus, remember that, my joke about android bottoms earlier, to the attention of the Romulans, so they can use it on themselves to become more fearsome enemies of the Federation and Klingons. Klingons don't like to talk about this with outsiders, so it's likely the Romulans never knew about this. Instead of saying, here's Khan again, but less interesting, you can take elements of Khan's backstory and use them in a new way. This would also connect these 3 pre-boot movies into a sort of trilogy. Nero brings information to the Romulans of this era that causes ripples like the Klingons joining the Federation, which causes more ripples like Arnold Darvin betraying his species out of pride and starting a second eugenics war spanning the galaxy this time. If you're going to branch into a new timeline, let's get weird. By the end of the movie, Kirk saves the day and gets a commendation from Spock where they can still work together, but with their ranks switched. In the original series episode Mirror Mirror, Mirror Spock said he liked being the science officer and didn't want to take command of the ship. Admittedly, part of that was he was less likely to be assassinated as number 2, but I like to think this not as mirrored Spock would feel similar. He respects the chain of command, but he likes when he could study new things the Federation wants to explore with someone else running the show. So if Kirk can do something heroic that saves the ship and puts a stop to the Romulan schemes, Spock can recognize Kirk would make an excellent captain. And you could have Kirk say, yeah, maybe, but I would need you there to back me up. While genetically enhanced Romulans would be the plot, some of the finer details I haven't decided on. I had a few ideas and I thought that might be too fan servicey, so I'll throw them out there and let you decide what you would want to see. One thought was using Gary Seven, who appeared in the original series Season 2 finale Assignment Earth. Gary Seven is basically Star Trek Doctor Who, an alien secret agent who knows if he doesn't blow up a rocket at a certain time, World War III will happen. He has a shape-shifting cat and a human companion played by Terry Garr. His people, the supervisors, would want to stop a eugenics war, especially if you accept the non-canonical book The Rise and Fall of Khan Noonien Singh, where he and Roberta Lincoln were instrumental in Khan's rise to power. Gary was native to the 20th century, but his people had some foreknowledge, so maybe he gets a hold of a time machine and he's trying to clean up the aftermath of Nero's time travel shenanigans from the first movie. Maybe he hooks up with the Temporal Agency from Enterprise, and for similar reasons as him, wants to prevent major damage being done to the time stream. I'm a big fan of Gary and Roberta, so I would like this. Or bring in Guinan from Star Trek The Next Generation. She was nearly immortal as she lived on Earth in the 1800s. I never got what her people were about, if they were spying on other cultures, but they seemingly weren't part of the Federation, since the Federation didn't know about the Borg until the era of Next Generation, and the El-Arian homeworld was destroyed by the Borg before the seeming death of James Kirk in Generations. But if you want an alien who isn't part of the crew helping out, say the Romulans don't have scientists of their own smart enough to figure out how to not replicate the mistakes the Klingons made with the augment virus. They kidnap scientists from across the galaxy to figure out how to make the virus work in their favor. Among these scientists is one Tolian Soran, played by Malcolm McDowell in Star Trek Generations. He was also an El-Arian, and if the El-Arians weren't forthcoming with their own cultural ideas and technologies, but were seen as advanced enough that the Borg wanted to assimilate them, you could say their government dispatched Guinan to kick butt and take names. She was never an action hero in TNG, but that's because TNG was never much of an action show. But these movies were, so in a certain situation, Guinan would be James Bonding across the universe. You could have some Romulans be against using the augment virus. I don't know who would be a good fit here, but Romulans apparently live over 200 years, so you could use a Romulan from Enterprise or from TNG as the voice of reason. They could team up with Kirk and Guinan or Gary Seven, or they could be unknowingly aiding Kirk as they do what they feel is best for the Empire. If you use Gary Seven or a temporal agent or Guinan, any of them might be aware Kirk is supposed to be captain of the Enterprise, but thanks to time travel, he isn't where he was in another reality. Gary Seven possibly having knowledge of alternate realities based on what he knew in Assignment Earth, and the Temporal Agency knowing about the alterations to this timeline would make sense. In The Next Generation, in the episode Yesterday's Enterprise, Guinan somehow recognized alterations that have been made to the timeline. Her intuitive abilities might clue her in that Kirk has a great future ahead of him. I still don't like someone else telling Kirk he's supposed to be captain, so I would want his promotion to happen independently of the guest star of the movie, but they can still know that it's supposed to happen. You could keep going with this new timeline with more movies, but I'm just here to improve the movies we got. Like I said at the top of the video, I like Beyond quite a bit, and this video was mostly just to wrap up plot threads I set up in my previous two videos. I hope you guys liked this one, and if you did, come back next week to see what else I'll be doing. Until then, have a good one.